There we go. All right, so we're going to do this panel discussion thing. I'm going to try to moderate this. I want to say a couple things. I actually was the person who got to film these courageous survivors in these testimonials that you've seen today. And they're pretty amazing, aren't they? Can we just have a round? We did not have the time to show their whole story for any of them. So you got little pieces of it. But I was very impressed from the first time we started. I also wanted to say that in this last video, he says kids will be kids a couple times. This pastor said that. The pastor's kid was 25 years old. He was not a kid. So, shifting gears a little bit, going back to that question that Mark so eloquently asked, what now? We want to have a panel discussion about what the church can do to be better at this topic. But before I do that, I want to go down the line here and have everybody introduce themselves. We have one extra member on the end here from ATVP. She's Amy. She's going to tell a little bit about herself because I know very little myself. I just know that ATVP does good work in this town, and we're very grateful for them. So let's go ahead and start with you, Amy, and then we'll come this way. Can you do that, or do you want me to start over here?
I can absolutely start.
Okay, good.
Yeah, my name is Amy Volz, and I work as a coordinator of domestic violence services at Alternatives to Violence of the Palouse. And for those of you who may not know about us, we are a local nonprofit here that serves both Idaho, here in Latah County, as well as Washington over in Whitman County. And we work with survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. And we've been doing this since 1980, so I'm hoping that you're familiar with us and what we do. And maybe I'll wait till everyone's introduced themselves to talk a bit more about what it is that we can offer.
Sure, that'd be fine. Okay, go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, I'm Sherry, and I lead out here in Celebrate Recovery.
Great, thank you. Ginger?
I'm Ginger Johnson.
Is your microphone on? I'm sorry, I probably didn't turn it on for you. There we go. Flip it on. There we go.
I'm Ginger Johnson. I am in Spokane. I've recently resigned as the regional director for the Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services, but very well aware of the ministry that's going to be going on here with the Her Journey classes for victims. I also am a state certified perpetrator treatment provider, so I work with perpetrators and pretty much everything around that issue of domestic violence in the family, and especially bridging the gap between the faith community and the other resources that are out there, and trying to help people find that hope and healing somehow in that quagmire. So.
Michelle, I'm Michelle Miller, and I'm a counselor.
Apparently Michelle and Ginger are going to be sharing. I think they're actually connecting here today. I noticed that earlier, so that's a good thing. Still not working? It's all right.
I'm Natalie Greenfield, and I am an abuse victims advocate here in Moscow.
I'm Aaron, and I have no idea what I'm doing sitting up here, so this will be fun. I'm the resident heckler.
I thought there was a pretty good question for you in the last set of questions, something that we definitely got, or maybe that was the one before that, yeah. So it looks like there we go, we got a question. This is for Michelle or for Amy. If you could ask for any kind of help from local churches for the work that you do, what would it be? And go ahead, do you want to go take it first, Amy?
Sure. Yeah, so like I was saying, we have a lot of stuff that we can help folks with that are going through abuse or, have experienced a sexual assault. And so we do offer like a 24-hour hotline that people can call. We have an emergency confidential shelter that people can go into if they're needing a safe place to be. And then we can help folks too with just a lot of the very practical things they might be wanting to do, whether that's some legal paperwork or whatnot. And so, I feel like when it comes to the faith community, we have some really good partners in the community. When people come to us with questions we're not necessarily equipped to answer, like what does this mean about my relationship with God or anything like that. We just really love knowing when there's certain pastors, that will reach out to us and say, please know that we're here and we're available, because sometimes people may want to talk to somebody from a different church than the church they're in, or they're going to want to talk to their faith leader, and we just want to know who we are able to refer people to. And then I think as far as other help, we do get a lot of support from local churches, just as in purely financial or other donations, like donation drives for our shelter and that kind of thing. It's kind of what's coming to mind.
Okay, great. Yeah, so basically it sounded to me like ATVP does a lot of work in the community, and you love to have church partners. Yeah, that's great. How about you, Michelle?
I actually, is my mic working?
Can you hold it up a little bit more?
I'm not very good at this part. I actually do work pretty well with real life here. We tag team quite a bit with people, I would say. Especially in the women's ministry, we've actually shared quite... Yes! Good job.
There, now we found it.
I've worked with quite a few women here through real life. And it's been nice to volunteer. I come over here to Moscow sometimes and work with some of the women over here. I've worked with Carrie Gray quite a few times. So it's been good sharing some of the people here and figuring out who else we can work with within the leadership, both in Pullman and in Moscow. So I've actually had a lot of support here through real life. It'd be nice to know who to work with in other churches in the communities, both in Moscow and in Pullman.
You hear that, other churches? If you're here, if you're here from a different church, you could help network. That would be fine. We didn't really invite lots of other people from the other churches. We might get there someday, but I know some of you might be here anyway. All right, another question. What can church leaders do to become safe, trustworthy places for people to seek help and healing from abuse? That's a great question. Does anybody want to volunteer for that one? I'm going to start with Ginger.
Well, I think it's really important for the staff, and actually whoever's answering the phone and people that walk in, they need to be educated about those kind of issues, because they're the first usually to interact, and people will ask for help. And then we know the first place that people will go is to clergy. And we heard that in several testimonies today, as they went to their pastor to try to get some help with the things that were going on in their life. And so making sure that pastors know the issues and have opportunities to go to forums like this, and making that available. And then a lot of churches are having counseling on staff. And so I think it's critical that those counselors have opportunity to get the training that they need around these issues. And I have so many cards on my desk of people that I send people to. I cannot help every single person at the level that they may need, and so I have to refer to someone. So having Michelle's card and having Sherry's card, and knowing that if somebody needs something, I can give immediate resource to that person. I think churches can definitely be a conduit of resources in the community if they can't necessarily staff those individuals.
Okay, so I'm actually going to thank you very much, Ginger. That's great. I'm also going to take a moment to answer this one myself. And I'm going to do a little bit of bragging here, because when we got the idea of doing this conference, my wife and I went to meet with Aaron, and we sat down and we said, we want to do this. And blew my socks off. He said, I'm so past talking about it, let's do it. So that was awesome. We need more of that. We need more of that. This has been it's been a great day and a great opportunity, so we're really glad this is going on. Anybody else want to answer this one? A safe place is a little bit more specific than that. I took this opportunity to tell that story. So.
Yeah, I just want to give you all a lot of credit for being here, because whenever we're talking about these kinds of issues, and again, this is something, me and my fellow staff, we're in it every single day, and we're every day learning something new, you know what I mean? And so it's such a huge component is the education piece, because, you all sitting here through this whole day now know these are some of the dynamics of abuse, and this is really, where these people are coming from, and then in turn makes you just a lot less I suppose, judgmental and just a lot better able to respond to that person and what they need right then, rather than trying to jump in and change it all for them. And so I really think that's the first step. So many, many props to you all.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And it also reminds me that one of the biggest, most important things about being safe is to listen. I mean, that's a very simple thing. If you guys can take a really simple thing away from this, when somebody comes to you with a problem like this, be ready to listen. You don't have an answer for them right away. You want to help them. Compassion and listening are just such a good place to start. And then, find somebody who might know something else. But churches get it wrong very often because they do the help that isn't help, jumping in to try to solve the problem. That's what Amy was talking about there. I think maybe we could do another question here. Ginger, do victims of domestic violence suffer from PTSD?
You gave me one earlier, so I'm doing the same treatment. I think, yes, absolutely they can. Do they always? Not necessarily. PTSD is a actual diagnosing title, and a lot of victims have never had that kind of a diagnosis, but they suffer often from very similar symptoms that a lot of people would say they think they have it, or I think so-and-so has it. Just like we do with OCD. If you like to put your dishes in the cupboard a certain way, people say, well, I have OCD. Well, probably not the actual diagnosed version, but we like to self-diagnose, right? And anybody that we're in a relationship with, we've got one for them, don't we? So I think we have to be very careful with throwing around terms like that. And so, yes, there are victims who suffer from PTSD. If that is a concern, then I definitely think that you should seek help from someone who may need to treat you at a more serious level than just conversation. So that would be where I toss you the ball.
Thank you. Do victims of domestic violence suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder? Yes, some do, some do not. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a diagnosed thing that comes from the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, which is something that I use to diagnose clients or patients when they come in, as is OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. And it is something, unfortunately, that is tossed around kind of jokingly these days, which is sad. I myself personally have been diagnosed with PTSD at a young age, and again, actually at a later age, which is kind of sad. Makes you think, oh my gosh, you didn't get over it the first time? I did, and then was diagnosed with it again. From a different perspective, which is a whole nother story for another day, which unfortunately you don't get to hear. But maybe if we do Awaken version 2, and they're brave enough to ask me back, just kidding. Please don't, Sherry, for their sake. So the short answer is yes, they can get it, absolutely. As can anybody, even in a car accident, you can develop post-traumatic stress disorder. It's when we get that imbalance, remember the whole brain model? When that prefrontal cortex goes offline and your amygdala or that limbic system starts recording, that's when we start getting those intrinsic memories start forming, and that amygdala and that limbic system starts recording. That's when PTSD starts its course.
Okay. I think I see a question for Aaron there.
Yes.
Do you think a person can give themselves over to evil so much that they become less than human? How should the church deal with evil like this?
No, you can't be less than what you are. How should the church deal with this? Depends on the evil.
That was way too quick. That was way too quick.
I don't know why that was so hard. Next.
Oh.
Exorcism at 6 o'clock tonight.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
we have a dissenting opinion.
Let me unpack this just a little bit in the context of what we're talking about. I don't think that you can become less than what you are. I think you can become a distorted version of what you were called to be, what you were made to be. But you can't be less than what you are. How could the church deal with evil like this? I So there's two theories. One is expose it to the community and let the community influence it to wholeness. The other is isolate it from the community and help it heal until it's able to be exposed to the community. I would say this, I'm a big advocate of relationship as long as it doesn't cost the people that are investing in it. And I'm talking about evil if it's a separate entity in it. So that would be the tension for me is this an evil that's going to take away from the people that would invest in it, that needs to be isolated for it and others' safety? Or is this something that in bringing people around it that would love them, would that then bring them healing? So that's the dance on that one.
Great. The next one's for Natalie and Aaron. So let's just move on to that one. I think we're ready. For Natalie and Aaron, why are churches so against this topic in general? Let's let Natalie go.
Okay. I don't know what you will say. I'm just going to do my thing
Hey, we're
here
giving
and
voices.
I'll fix whatever you say. How about that?
That's probably a good plan, 'cause I'm going to do some damage. I think the church is so against this topic in general. I think it's probably kind of a multi-layered answer, but if I had to put it in a nutshell, I would say because you have the church and it's full of human beings and they're all fallible, and some of them maybe are more enticed by things like power or control. And when you're in a position of leadership, oftentimes those things are more readily accessible to you. Might be easier to become, or to lose the focus. Like the church is supposed to be like the hospital, right? The place of healing and love and nurture. And abuse it's ugly and it's really messy and it doesn't fit well. It's hard to talk about if your focus is not completely and purely on loving people. And abuse and stories of abuse and accusations and all the stuff that goes along with that is really, or can be, really bad for PR. I think that's a really big element. I think that then there's like an element of like the fact that talking about sex or anything to do with sexual stuff is kind of taboo, and it tends to be more taboo in religious communities. But I think that's only a little part of it, and I think the biggest part of it is that when we lose our focus on the important stuff, like how we treat people, and our focus gravitates toward power and control, abuse just has no place there. Talking about abuse, that's what I mean. Talking about abuse has no place there. And yeah, I don't know if that was clear at all.
That's great. Lots of good insights in there.
I would springboard off of something I've heard Natalie say before that I was really hoping that I could hear you say again. But I've heard her speak once before, which in my personal journey was a major piece of the impetus of having today. So it's really Natalie's fault that you're sitting here today in that sense. But she said something about, in a different talk, about the church and its need for redemption and reconciliation, and it believes in that. And I do. I'm a huge advocate of restoration and all that stuff. The problem is abuse on both sides, both from the side of the victim and from the side of the abuser, is a long, messy, nasty process. And we often don't get to see redemption as we would want it, I think. Just as a pastor, like, you got to be committed. Think about this. I don't get paid to counsel. I get paid to run a church. Counseling is one of the things that I do in that process. I got to be committed to walking with somebody for years. And I have, in our particular church, we have 2,000 people that come to our church. Like, how in the world do I even commit to that? You know what I mean? So it's this daunting task that seems to be messy. Nobody really wants to talk about it, and nobody has a real good answer for how we speed the process up. And we have this tension between wanting both sides to be fixed, but one side seems to be willing to admit their fixedness way more readily than the other. And I think the problem is Jesus sides with the side that doesn't admit it so readily. And so that's messy. And when do we know that we look at redemption like a resolution. And because of that, the church has a hard time engaging relationships that are actually, there's just no clean answer to it. There's no clean answer to it, so we just avoid it. And let me talk to you about some other stuff while I'm on the top. And the other thing is, like, abuse victims, and this is a fear of, like, when you're a pastor, if people accuse you of something, it doesn't even have to be true, right? That in my position, so you bring in a person who's deeply wounded and they don't know how to deal with something and it gets messy and that happens. I got buddies that are out of the ministry today because of something that they were accused of that wasn't even true. I got some buddies that were accused of stuff that was true, and that's a whole other topic. But, like, hurt people hurt people. That's dangerous, and so it's hard to bridge that gap. And that's why I said at the beginning today, I don't even really know what this looks like exactly. I just know this is the conversation that Jesus is calling us to, and so we're going to have it, whatever that looks like. And if it means I get to go sell cars, then I'll go work for Wesley. I'll go build stuff. He'll have to fix me. All the stuff I build, I can't even pound a nail, but we'll figure it out.
All right, that's great. Next one.
I was all over the place with that, right?
No, I thought about trying to add to that one, but after you, I was like, no. He said it all. I can't think of anything to add. Okay, in what ways, as a high schooler, can I be a good advocate for students at my school in their relationships, both dating and family? Oh, that's a great, great question. Let's see here. I'm going to go to Sherry to start this one, and then maybe you can pass it to Ginger, because I know Ginger has good things to say, too.
All right. I love that question, but I don't know necessarily that it's any different for a high schooler as for any of the rest of us. A good advocate is going to learn. They're going to know what abuse is. And so when your friend comes to you to say, this person in my life is stealing my voice, this person in my life isn't allowing me to be who I am, you're going to affirm them that that is true and that they can do something about it. And you might go to an advocate, an older advocate that could do something with you, but you're going to stand with them and say, yeah, your voice is being taken away. Let's go get it back.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Ginger?
There are a lot of programs out there. I don't know what is actually going in this community. I know Green Dot is a really popular program for prevention and teen dating and on college campuses. And that's a really great, it's kind of like see something, say something. It's that idea of teaching people to stand up for others when you see something going on. And so that's a really great opportunity if you see someone calling someone a name that they're dating or something, he can't talk to you like that. That's not appropriate. Or, just speaking up when it's safe to do so. And those kind of things as we teach our children from the time they're little, standing up for anybody who's, as we talked about, not having a voice, right? The people who are alone, who are on the side. I always the wallflower children, right? One of the things I taught my sons was, when you walk in a room and you're going to decide where you're going to sit, go sit with the person who's by himself, because that person needs somebody to sit with them. And to me, that's what advocacy is all about. And we're not dealing with always, especially in high school, there's so many relationship dynamics now with mixed gender relationships and all this other stuff going on. And so speaking up for the kids who are marginalized is a critical thing that Christian kids can do. So learning, there's books out there, there's all kinds of classes, there's programs that specialize in this, schools are having rallies, prevention, all that kind of stuff. So definitely talk to an adult if you don't feel safe confronting, but be there in support for someone who is being mistreated. I think that's just a cultural thing we've got to start doing on a large scale.
Thank you, Ginger. I want to just jump in and add one thing to that myself, and if anybody else wants to address it, I would. Okay, would you like to as well, Amy? Okay. So one other thing I would say is that initial conversation I had about awareness with cigarettes and seatbelts, that's a huge thing that you can do. You're young, you have many, many years of relationships and of people in your life to talk to them about what matters, and you can begin the process of changing the expectation for what is okay and what is healthy. And you might do that yourself by setting, understanding boundaries, setting boundaries, learning about what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. There's a lot of stuff that's promoted in pop culture and in our society at large that is highly abusive. It sets a standard that really isn't good. And so standing against that with yourself and with your peers, something that I think would be really, really positive. And go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we as advocates at ATVP, every day we're seeing the consequences of violence and just so much hurt and so much harm. And I think the way a lot of us keep at it and keep going through, at least for me, is by thinking about we are in this to and ultimately prevent violence from happening, right? That we're not here to just lay in the muck with everybody and roll about every day. That we're here because we know that there's a possibility in the future that it's going to be different. And I don't think my generation's figured it out. My parents' generation didn't figure it out. But there's the biggest hope for me, right, is in youth, in high schoolers and middle schoolers, and the amount of power that a high schooler holds when they walk through the hallways knowing what boundaries are, knowing how to have healthy disagreements, how to communicate in a respectful way, when they know about the way that gender roles impact our lives and impact our relationships and maybe even their parents' relationships, when they know the ways that media, impacts our views about what relationships should look like. It's just hugely powerful, and I think it's one of the biggest tools we have for preventing violences in our youth. So I would say, yes, you can be advocate for students even before any violence has happened.
Okay, so they gave me an Olympic task here. Looks like we have 9 questions, is what I heard last, and we have 3.5 minutes. So, next question. Natalie, would you say that sharing your story publicly has been worth it? Would you recommend it just for anyone to share their abuse?
It's been
Easy.
worth it for me.
Yeah, it's been worth it. It's been, the cost has been high, but it's been worth it. Would I recommend for just anyone to share their abuse? Maybe not. Maybe not on a grand scale necessarily, if that's not the right fit for you. But share it, yes. Find somebody safe, even if it's just one person, and do share it. And yes, it's been worth it.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Sometimes a child who was sexually abused is in a very serious way doesn't find their voice until years after the abuse has ended. Is there a limitation to the time period that an abuser should experience consequences? Wow. I don't even know. Does anybody have any idea about the answer to that question?
I have one sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the hope of what we're talking about is healing for the abused. If the abuser needs to pay so that the abused can find healing, then so be it. I don't care about the time limit. But the goal is that the abused finds healing.
I agree with that. And I think a truly penitent abuser should not be worried about the consequences. They should welcome the consequences if it can bring healing in the same way.
Can I say one thing about that real quick?
Sure.
I think that I don't think that there should be a limitation to the time period that the abuser should experience consequences, especially if you look at it from the angle of the fact that abuse changes the victim's life forever, right? So there's no time period that the victim is, no longer experiencing consequences of some kind.
Very, very good point. All right, next question. For Michelle, how do you deal with memories that resurface about past abuse?
Me personally, or somebody that's dealt with abuse? That's a double-folded question. So I'm gonna not talk about myself since I have the microphone. Counseling. Well, I guess that's actually an answer to both. Counseling. Find a therapist. Find friends, but that's a lot to take to your friends. You really need to find a trained professional that knows how to deal with it. And actually, there is a class here, the Genesis process, right? Is the one that they're talking about here at the church. It's a good start. It's a good start. Also talk with Sherry Hall. She's got some things set up here at the church that she's getting started with, and she can also refer you to people here. So that's a good start there.
Can I?
Sherry's got something too.
Okay, let's have Sherry on that one too.
So most of the time, abuse is going to create in us false belief systems. That's where our false belief systems come from. And so it is in walking into the truth about that that actually is what heals the memories. So the thing I think that you can do is figure out where your false belief systems are and learn what the truth of that is.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, here we go. For Ginger, should churches implement programs to teach children or students about healthy relationships?
Absolutely. Shouldn't the Bible be where we learn what healthy looks like? If we all acted more like Christ, we wouldn't be having these conversations. So I think that is certainly, we talk about be kind, God is love. We talk about all these things in very general terms when they're little. And as they grow, we have to learn how to implement that into each part of the curriculum. And it just makes sense. Absolutely. And you can get even more specific if there's things going on in the community or in the church body that need to be addressed. We need to talk to the kids about it at an appropriate level and make sure that they know what does God say about these kind of things. Most of these kids can bring up questions, talk about stump the teacher. You know, mommy and daddy are going through this. I'm living in 3 different houses now. You know, these are the kids in Sunday school, right? And we got to be able to, God has the answers for these questions, and we've got to bring him into that conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, another one. I'm on a roll here. For Sherry, regarding divorce, people told me I should have stayed with my abuser and should have prayed more, and I never know what to say. So what do you say to somebody who says something like that?
The divorce question. So marriage is a covenant. It's a covenant between 2 people. And what divorce is, it's a recognition that the covenant has been broken. And that's what God hates. He hates the covenant being broken because it hurts people. It's not his plan for that to happen. Divorce is simply a recognition that that's already occurred and it can't be repaired anymore. And so what do you say to people? Well, maybe you say that it's a covenant that has been broken and I can't do anything to repair it.
Yeah, thank you. I would also just add one more thing to that is to say, experiencing abuse has taught me more about hard-heartedness than I ever wanted to know. So when Jesus says that the reason that the rule about divorce was given was because of hard-heartedness, I think we could meditate on that a little bit. So next question. Oh, Ginger has one thing.
Most of you recognize 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. You probably had those verses read at your wedding. If you read that and understand what love is supposed to look like, and someone's telling you that they love you, and it doesn't line up with that, not that our love is perfect, but there's some pretty strong statements in there that an abuser does not line up with. And so when we talk about love and divorce and marriage and a lot of those things, that chapter's got some really incredible things of what love is supposed to look like, the kind of love that we're supposed to be having in those relationships. So I think it's a really good way to understand that Scripture points out, you know, being really loving, but, you know, behaving like this, it's not love.
Great, thank you. Okay. How do we talk about your siblings about your different experiences of parental abuse, especially when bullying each other became a mechanism to defend yourself? Wow, this is kind of like touching on this topic of child abuse, not child sexual abuse, is what I'm understanding this to be. Is that what we think this is? I guess I can just decide, right? Okay. I'm going to say this is about actual Yes, I know we're over time. I think we got like how many questions? 2 more. We're going to make it. We're going to do it. Okay? All right, so. Anybody
I
want
hear
to
the guy on the back end's pretty long-winded.
I heard it's all right. Okay. Anybody want to take this one?
That's a hot topic.
Michelle, why don't you tell us what you think? Okay. How do you talk to your siblings about your different experiences of parental abuse, especially when bullying each other became a mechanism to defend yourself?
Okay. Well, bullying is just abuse that it's abuse at younger ages. I mean, that's basically what's happening. It's not treating others with honor and respect. So if there was parental abuse, in this, if I'm understanding the question, which seems to be all of our challenge here, the parents were abusing, and so the kids started bullying each other to defend themselves, or
that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So they were learning behaviors, from the way that the parents were treating the kids. The kids learned to treat each other with that same type of abusive behavior. So how do you talk to your siblings about that? I mean, I guess you could have a pretty decent conversation around that and say, what did you think when this was happening? And then we started doing that with each other. And you might could bring in somebody who can kind of facilitate or mediate that. I have business cards in the back. But that's a lot of what the kind of work that we do is working with people who have these experiences, and sometimes bringing in a whole bunch of people sitting around a table talking about what went on. And that's the first step of bringing healing. So I think if that's what they're talking about. Right?
Okay.
My best shot.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And I think the other thing is the normal conversation. What is normal?
Right.
When what you need to do is you need to have a conversation with your siblings about, hey, the way we grew up, that's not actually healthy. It might be normal for us, but it's not healthy. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the next question, and then we have one more after that. So we're almost there. Thank you for hanging in with us. So define safe. People want support without dirty looks later. When a victim speaks up, they pay for it later at home. The way a perpetrator is treated after they share at church can extinguish or set fire at home. Help. I might take that one. Can I take that one? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to say that...
Please.
I got one. This is something we did address, and it came up a couple of times. This is one of the reasons that victims speaking up need to be very careful. They need to find a safe place, and that doesn't, like a church being a safe place, if in church you mean a public setting so that the perpetrator is going to find out about it, that wouldn't be safe. That's that by definition, when we say safe, that means thinking about how to say it so that those consequences don't happen at home. And this is an important principle of working with victims, especially in dangerous situations, is that they know how to survive better than anybody else, okay? They have to write their own survival, and you need to empower them. One of the first things we do when working with survivors is give them back the power that's been taken away from them. And so the first way you can do that when they're in a spot like this is there's no right answer. You must tell people at church, or you must not tell people at church. It's if you can find a safe place at church where he won't find out, then you can tell it at church. Hope that helps. Okay, last question for Aaron. That's great, then he can just start talking. When I was a young mom, my pastor and elders said my husband gave my 1-year-old a black eye because I was not submissive. My husband was a deacon. Oh, yikes. He continued to be abusive. I believe this was because of my sin. How would you handle this?
I'm the one who cries. Let me say, first of all, I am so sorry. That is so wrong. Your husband gave your son a black eye because your husband has problems that need to be dealt with. How would I handle this? I would like to say that I would sit down with him and have a gentle conversation. Probably, and I hope you forgive me for this, I would grab him by the throat and put him up against a wall and say, you ever touch a kid again and you're going to feel my wrath. That's the wrong answer. I know that, but I can tell you this. Number one, he would no longer be a deacon. And I would hope that the vetting process of how we elect church leadership to begin with would help mandate some level of spiritual maturity before someone would be even eligible to be considered for that. Right. Yeah, nobody ever hurts anybody else because of my sin. Ever. That's a lie. So he would no longer be a deacon for sure. Immediately the assessment would be, are you and your child safe? And that would be dealt with. And I would say this, I would never encourage you to stay in a home with somebody who would threaten your physical safety. Ever. I believe with all of my heart that that is upholding an institution over loving people, and that's not what God does, ever.
That's a great place to end. Thank you all. We're going to have one final talk, and I don't remember how this happens, actually. I think maybe we just leave and let you carry on. Is that what we do?
Could you guys just leave? Just quietly go.
Just go.
I hate goodbyes. Thank you.